Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen. I'm here with London Paul. And Paul, even though we've discussed and probably done podcasts in the past on different platforms, it's always good to bring back something that we need to discuss and emphasize because while it may not be in the news today, it definitely comes up in discussion with many people as the dollar starts to decline, as digital transactions become the norm in many places around the world for most commerce, and that is the cashless society. Anyway, Paul, I want to thank you as always for stopping by, and I want to get your thoughts in regards to the viability of a all cashless society, and or is it really just something that's pumped out by different media sources for different agendas?
Well, obviously, thanks, Ken, for joining also, as ever. It's a pleasure that we can get together. So, yeah, the cashless society, I have to say, is something that I find, well, what underpins it is horrendous, despicable, deplorable, and much stronger language. But this concept of a cashless society, which is something that conspiracy theorists love to churn out all the time and claim is the vision of these global elites who apparently run the planet, and they don't run the planet because there's no such thing. It's far more nuanced and complicated than that. But to have a cashless society the way the world operates now, and you have to understand how the world operates to realize it's impossible and it's nonsensical. And what we thought we'd do is go through various facets of why this is not the case and impossible, and highlight very clearly then why people should not imagine that this is a reality. And just a small aside I want to make about this and to highlight where these ideas come from. Now, let's be absolutely clear about this. I'm absolutely not saying I'm a fan of central bank digital currencies, but where the story came in the West about central bank digital currencies being used to phase out cash and control us all, let's tell you where the origins of that came from. It came from the fact that China is leading the world in digital currencies. It's had the digital yuan in existence for quite some time. In pilot forms, it's done things with its population and with trade and commerce. So basically in wholesale transactions predominantly, but also some retail. And the reason this story came about is because it's China. And there are people who want to claim China's trying to take the world over, which is nonsense. And they're the top major surveillance state of the world. And they're forcing all their people to stop using cash and use a central bank digital currency, which isn't true either. The other statement that came out was it's fully programmable and they can cut you off whenever they want from using a central bank digital currency. Well, that story came about because when China was implementing a pilot study, it gave a number of people, X number of yuan, whatever it was. I don't know the exact figure. It doesn't matter. Let's say it's 200 yuan. And there was a time scale imposed on them to spend the money because they were trying to stress test the platform and they didn't want people dribbling these transactions through for 6 months. That's the only reason why they did it. And that statement then got told, look, they'll force you to spend the money, even though you don't want to. You'll have a time limit to spend it. That's where that story came from. Again, it's not true. So why am I highlighting this? Because there's a lot of stories that have come out regarding this cashless society and how there's this deliberate intention to stop everyone using cash. Well, another point worth making is quite a few European nations, including the Netherlands, came out not that long ago and told shops you have to accept cash, because some shops try to not accept cash. And why do they not want to accept cash? Not because they're playing some game with the government or in cahoots. They don't want to do it because they want everything to be processed electronically. That's the reason why. They don't want to be handling enormous amounts of cash in their business. There's no other reason for it. It's as simple as that. So that's just a bit of background to highlight why a lot of these stories come about with no basis in reality, and people put two and two together and make 52. But let's come on to some of the areas where, setting aside what happens in the high street and people going to their supermarket and using cash, let's talk about the horrible, disgusting, nasty things that go on in the world where everything in those sectors operate on the basis of cash. The first one is international narcotics or drugs trade. Everything is conducted in cash, starting from when crops are grown somewhere and then drugs are processed. Then the drugs go from there, then they're shipped to various countries. So all the way to the process of when some guy in the street who's a drug dealer sells whatever to a client of his, for want of a better word. But that's how it's, because it's transactional. The whole process is done with cash. Now, a statement people come out with when you make all these statements, well, they'll use Bitcoin instead. No, they do not use Bitcoin instead. If you really seriously imagine the drug cartels in the world use Bitcoin as part of this process, I'm sorry, that's simply not the case. So if you want to phase out cash, as people believe to be true, then good luck telling these drug cartels, I'm putting you out of business, because people like to talk about the World Economic Forum running the world. You want to see what drug cartels do and their influence and the amount of money they have, the assets they own. They have their own private military. They're a really serious threat. If you put them out of business, then we should be extremely fearful, or those implementing the policy should be. And they're not going to do that in any way, shape, or form. They're not going to touch the drug cartels, not going to do anything to upset them. So if you're going to have a cashless society, well, the first problem with that is the drugs narco trade is enormous, and they're not going to be able to phase it out. So you're going to have to allow people to have cash to buy their fix, or people to sell drugs, or all the intermediaries in that whole disgusting food chain of getting these drugs out in the high street and people buying them. That's the first point. And I'm sorry people can argue to the contrary. That's just a statement of fact. So any sector of this nature is always going to be cashless, because no one wants to be traced. So enormous amounts of cash have to be on hand at various points along that whole distribution chain, including backhanders paid to people to turn a blind eye when shipments come into countries, to all the middlemen in this whole process. They're not going to sit there and go, I know, I'll get paid in Bitcoin, because let's face it, what's the one thing that Bitcoin is a big problem? Every transaction is traceable. So anyone in the world could go and find out who was conducting these transactions where, and pretty soon all hell would break loose. So that's number one reason. And I'll obviously go through each point, Ken, and you can obviously, add your two pennyworth, so to speak, for each of these individual areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I want to emphasize is, money. There are multiple different elements to what is considered money, but really to distill it into a term, it's a idea backed by confidence. Whether you're trading seashells 5,000 years ago, cattle straight across with another farmer, or if you use a medium of exchange like gold, silver, or in this case, paper currency, it has to have the confidence of the individuals who are involved in the commerce. Now, the problem that you have, of course, is you do have things like international trade. Well, if nations have confidence in the currencies of the other nations, then trading it digitally or without cash to cash, back and forth, as I think you mentioned, it's not feasible to have an $800 million trade deficit or whatever with Asia, primarily China, and to ship pallets of $100 bills on tankers heading back and forth across the Pacific. It's not feasible. So in international trade, digitally is the best way to do it, conveniently for individuals, having debit cards, credit cards, etc. is a convenient way to do things. But the reality is, in their minds, in people's minds, they know that if they lose confidence in a bank or in the dollar and they want to change it for something else, et cetera, that they know they can go to their financial institution and take the physical currency out. As long as they know that and believe that, then running a digital system is fine and isn't really a problem. But it's when, the potential that you take the power of one's own wealth away from them, that's where you get into the, negative side of this. And I think it's really impossible because on average, more people will not allow that to happen in a given society, as long as they know that they can always take it out of the financial institutions and not be beholden to them or the government.
Well, yeah, that's an added dimension, of course, to this, that how people react. And they'll say, well, they don't care what people do. Well, ultimately, that's not true either. If you upset the vast bulk of a population, you potentially have problems. But we're not going to get into that, because the point here is to try and emphasize why a cashless society is not a reality. And the other thing is about shutting people's accounts down. Well, they can do that now if they want to, very easily. If they want to shut your account down, freeze your assets, they can do it. So they don't need to have another form of digital currency, because you own a digital bank account, to do that to you. It's pointless, meaningless. And the question is, how often have you ever heard of someone in the street having their account frozen? Very, very infrequently. And the excuse, well, they're going to do this in the future. I'm sorry, they could do anything. That is not a justification for why something's going to happen because I think they're going to do it in the future when they've not done it in the past. Now, another point worth making, which is extremely important, is the whole thing to do with international terrorism. Now, terrorists all over the world are always paid in cash. There is no way they are ever going to sit there and go, I know, I'll accept Bitcoin. Because again, what are they going to do? Somebody in West Asia somewhere who's part of a terror cell gets paid, and then what's he going to do with this Bitcoin? How is he going to transact it? How is he going to feed his family? It's not reality. Who's he going to sell it to? I mean, and get the dollars or whatever currency it is. Normally it's dollars, to be honest, as a result of doing whatever they're paid to do. That's not reality. So the question is, if you phase out cash, then all these international terror groups aren't going to be financed. Well, guess what? They're not going to work anymore. They're going to refuse to work. They're not going to do things for nothing. They want hard cash that they can go and trade and spend somewhere, again, because it's not traceable. And international terrorism, as disgusting and despicable as it is an enormous industry. It operates all over the world to varying degrees, and we've seen plenty of evidence of that in the past. That's a hugely intricate operation. And the question is, and it doesn't matter who we suspect is financing international terrorism. We're not here to discuss that. But the question is, they need huge sums of money. So they have to get huge sums of money from somewhere. So there are other parties involved in this process. And if you then create a cashless society on that basis, well, then they can become part of the problem. They don't want to be part of that problem either, in trying to then say, well, we can't pay these individuals anymore. So it's an immensely complicated problem again, and simplifying international terrorism and claiming it can all be done on the cashless basis, I'm sorry, it's just not realistic. There's no shred of evidence to support that viewpoint whatsoever, because if anybody in a very broad sense has ever read any books about this or has any exposure to it via people who understand how international terrorism works, would tell you it's utter nonsense. It cannot be financed other than with cash. And that's always the way it has been. And it's always the way it will be in the future. So, okay, the argument is, if you're going to have a cashless society, you're going to phase out international terrorism, and apparently you're also going to, in the process, phase out the entire international drug trade. Okay, so if you genuinely think that's realistic, then you might be onto something. But the reality is those industries are, and I'm using industry in the loosest sense of the word, are enormous, with enormous sums of money spent. They're not simple little operations. All these entities have to be armed. Who's arming them? How does that work? Who pays for them? You know, how are these the sectors and industries, how do they conduct business along the whole food chain? Think about that and then ask yourself, is this really going to be done with transactions that everyone has visibility of and knows precisely where all these weapons go and who they're sold to and when and how? Absolutely not. And that's just part of the food chain as well. Then there's all the recruitment of people, where you get them from, how you pay them, how you keep them on and retain, or worse, some are just sleeper cells, etc., etc. This is an enormously complex business, for want of a better word, again, operation, and it certainly can't be done in a cashless world.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. On top of, and I'm not implying that the intelligence agencies in the West or even in the East fund terrorism, but they do fund assets for intelligence work, covert and overt intelligence work all around the world. And the vast majority of those want to be paid in cash, primarily because anything that's digitally locked, et cetera, can be tracked, and you can lose, they'll find out the asset. But take a look at also what happened under the Obama administration. Iran, which had all of its assets frozen in the West, demanded or got pallets of physical currency shipped to them, airlifted to them, because they did not trust or want to use anything attributed to the SWIFT system. So you're going to have where Western governments are using the currency, the reserve currency, as a weapon. Many nations are not going to want to affiliate themselves or trade if they are stuck solely on a digitally based system. They're going to want access to the physical cash. They're not going to want to deal with the financial institutions that, as we know with Russia, as we know with Iran, many different areas can freeze them at any time. They still want that cash potential to deal with other countries. And then, of course, you have, in the instance of, what was the other one I was thinking? It passed me. But the fact of the matter is even...
Hello?
Or the demand of cash over that of just a digital transaction.
Yeah, don't worry. I think I lost you for a few seconds, but don't worry. Kind of think it was only literally a few seconds, so we'll just carry on. So what I'm going to do now is lump a whole bunch of other things in. I don't want to keep going on and on because this could last for hours, and we're not here to do very long podcasts. We want to make a point and be as succinct as possible, but also you have to look at all the other disgusting illicit trades that go on in the world, like human trafficking, organ trafficking, all the other illicit crime that goes on with big organized crime. Organized crime, you talk about, again, the World Economic Forum. Read and understand what organized crime does in the world and the power they wield. It's enormous. Most of that trade, again, is done in a cashless way to avoid anybody having any visibility of who's part of that industry, for want of a better word. Again, that's another example. Then you have prostitution, and the list goes on and on. You get the point. All these are cashless industry because, again, nobody wants to be traced, right? For very obvious reasons, because it's illicit, it's criminal, and they're not therefore going to give up cash. So if you're going to then have a cashless society, well, good luck telling organized crime sorry, you can no longer operate. So imagine the amount of money that's laundered across every Western nation, for argument's sake, for a whole myriad of reasons. And it ends up being laundered through businesses, etc., etc. You're going to go to these this criminal cartel, these organized crime, and say, sorry, it's over, you can't do this anymore. You'd end up with horrendous problems because organized crime has enormous sphere of influence and power, and often is involved in the sort of crimes that governments have to turn a blind eye to because they don't want to get involved because it's that dangerous and that serious. So you're going to anger in it and basically put those people out of business as well, because often organized crime is behind the things I've just mentioned. So, and there's many more things, but you get the point. Again, a cashless society would create that problem. And that would then become a major problem for nation states because, as I said, organized crime is an enormous industry. It has enormous power and influence. And definitely historically, there are things that have gone on where law enforcement turns a blind eye to it because they have no choice but to do so. This is a very, very serious problem. And if you intend phasing out organized crime, then obviously that would be done certainly to a large extent by a cashless society, but the chance of doing that is next to nothing. And it's another reason why this whole cashless society myth is a myth, because it's impossible. And if you understand how the world operates and how organized crime works, how international terrorism works, how the drugs cartels work, etc., then you would realize very simply and very easily it's nonsense, and it's going to upset some people saying this. They're going to go get angry, they're going to deny it's true, but what we just said is factually true. So you can deny it all you like, but you're just denying reality.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that in the 1920s, the reason there was so much crime in America, Chicago, New York, etc., was even though we had prohibition, people wanted to drink, and they were going to do whatever was necessary to be able to drink. The same thing would happen, worldwide when it comes to wanting the vices and other types of illicit activities. They're going to want it done, and it's going to be done in cash. Anyway, was there any other final points
No, I
you
think
wanted to
we've
add?
made that point very succinctly.
Very good. Paul, I want to thank you as always for being a part of this great discussion.
Yes, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you for being a part as well. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.